So in case you didn't hear me, pass your question cards to the outside and they will collect them. There we go, lights.
Oh.
Ah,
Bad idea.
the naked truth. Are we ready? Somebody say go, Cooper. All right, I'll go. My name is John Cooper. I'm the director of the Sundance Film Festival. Welcome to, thank you. Welcome to Power of Story, Vision of Independence. This is a signature event for us. Each year, we do 2 a year at the Sundance Film Festival. What I like about this one in particular, it's connecting to Art of Film Weekend. It's a new sort of way we're thinking about the second half of the festival. So all the panels, all the things we do that are called off-screen are about the craft of filmmaking. And so it's a celebration of that. This is kicking it off. And what craftier people than what we got on stage. I think that's it for me. I'm getting off the stage because I'm turning it over to our friend at Sundance, and he's a critic, a film historian, Leonard Maltin.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Well, we just happened to be in the neighborhood, and we thought, come and talk. We're here because, as John said, this is a discussion about the art of film, but what really I think we have discussed briefly beforehand, what we really want to discuss is love of film. Because that's why we're all here. That's why, I know that's why these two gentlemen are here, and I'm pretty sure that's why most of you are here. Love of movies, love of cinema, whatever you want to call it. And that's where I want to start our conversation tonight. And none of this is planned, none of this is rehearsed. But I want to ask each of you in turn, when did you fall in love with movies and how?
You want to talk to the oldest guy first?
You volunteered to speak first, so go right ahead.
Well, first of all, I think probably what George and I have in common is a love of cinema, but also a desire for independence. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that he and I have in common. How it started for me is that as a kid growing up in Los Angeles, it was a lower working class neighborhood and there wasn't much to do. And so we would walk, we didn't have a car, the family didn't have a car, so we would walk to a local theater and see movies on Saturday night. And I was like 4 or 5 years old. I mean, I was just a kid, but it had great impact on me because you would see 2 films, and you would see a Pete Smith short, you would see 1 or 2 cartoons, you would see a Pathé newsreel, war still going on in the front. So that's what you got for 40 cents or whatever it was. And that was my first experience for film, and I guess what it tied into me was the idea of storytelling. I mean, I was always a lover of the word story. I mean, I can't think of anything more exciting than to be a child and hear the words once upon a time. It just got me going, you know. So story was a big part of it. So here was visual storytelling. That was my first experience.
And for you, George?
Well, when I grew up in a very small town in Central California, and there were 2 movie theaters there, and we'd go to the movies every once in a while. And I enjoyed the movies, but I didn't become obsessed with them or anything. I mean, as I got older, I just sort of go to the movies to chase girls. I didn't really know that there was actually something on the screen. Mm-hmm. And but I'd always been interested in visual art, in the early years, I used to listen to these kind of Disney story records. You put the story on, and then you turn the page, and you got to see the pictures as you did it. And I listened to a lot of radio. And I love to imagine what was actually happening, and filling in the blanks. And then eventually, we got a television when I was about 10 years old, and watched that. But in the beginning, there wasn't very much, so I really wasn't that aware. I liked art, I liked drawing, I liked photography, those sorts of things. And it was just by happenchance that I ended up with a good friend of mine that was going to USC Business School, talking me to go to USC And she said they've got a photography school, so why don't you go there, because you'd like photography. I wanted to go to Art Center. My father refused to let me go. You know, he said, you want to pay for it yourself. But at that point, Art Center was like one of the most expensive universities in the country. And so I said, okay. And I got there and I said, this isn't photography, it's a cinematography. And it's not really cinematography, it's movies, it's cinema. I said, I can't imagine that they have a course at a university where you learn how to make movies. And it was there that I fell in love with movies. It really wasn't until I was, you know, again, 20 years old.
How interesting.
And before that, I was just, you know, a dumb kid that liked cars.
But I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but I know that, having discussed this with you before, I know that one thing that did catch your eye and attention were the old serials, the Saturday matinee serials that they showed on TV in those days.
Right. But those were, you know, there was a ton of things.
Yeah, sure.
You know, that's sort of, it's like comic books.
Yeah.
You know, I read comic books until I was 10 years old, and then they invented television, and I said, oh, this is great. And I never read another comic book after that. But it's the same thing with the serials. You know, the serials were one thing of, you know, Gunsmoke and
Yeah.
and you know, after a while there was a lot of television, and mostly
Right.
westerns.
Yeah.
Most of
In
what I
those
grew
days,
up on
yeah.
was I was
Sure.
in the golden age of television westerns,
Mm-hmm.
and so if anything had any influence, it's probably that.
But if it hadn't been for seeing Flash Gordon and the Perils of Nyoka and serials like that, there is a through line from them to Star Wars and certainly to Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, but that was quite a ways into my career.
Yeah.
You know, I started out doing artsy films.
Oh, of course. I
And
know.
then I went and did American Graffiti, and I really had no interest in science fiction at all. You know, there's this whole thing about how I spent my whole life drawing little space soldiers, but I never did that. I spent my whole life drawing cars, and I was completely obsessed with cars. And even when I was in film school, I was obsessed with experimental films, most of the kind I'd seen in San Francisco with Bruce Conner and Bruce Bailey and George Cukor and all, you know, Kuchar and all those guys. So I wasn't really into dramatic filmmaking at all. And, you know, graffiti happened because I did THX, and Francis and I had an independent film company in San Francisco, and the first film I made was THX, and we wrote a bunch of scripts and turned them into the studio, who was advancing us the money. They took one look at that movie and took all our money back. So we ended up about $300,000 in debt. Francis had to go out and get a job. I had to go and do something. He said, well, why don't you, instead of doing all these cold, artistic, crazy movies you do, why don't you just do a comedy? Show me you can do something that's got some human beings in it. And I said, well, he said, I know you can't do it. I'll bet you can't do it. I said, I can do that. Because that was the way we were in those days. So I didn't have anything else to do because I was out of a job. So that's when I wrote American Graffiti. But it wasn't, you know, I was ready to go back and do documentary films and basically do experimental films because that's really what I wanted to do.
Well, we'll continue that part of the saga in a little bit, but I want to bring it back to you, Bob, because like George, you like to draw, and that was you thought that was where you were heading, really, toward an art career, right?
Yeah. When I was a kid, I drew for companionship. Parents couldn't afford a babysitter, so if they had to go somewhere to play cards with somebody, they'd take me along. And because I started drawing at 4 or 5, because that obviously was something I was comfortable with and was interested in, they would give me paper and a pencil and let me go off and draw. So in my head, I guess I assumed I wanted to be an artist. And then I had an experience where you have these moments, maybe 1 or 2 or maybe 3, where something happens that changes the direction you're going to go in. It happened to me in the 3rd grade in grammar school in Los Angeles, and I was not interested in what the teacher was saying. I wasn't interested in what the class was about. To me, it was someone standing and talking, and so I just wasn't interested. So what I did was draw under the table, and I would draw things that interested me, and that kept me going. But the problem was I wasn't paying attention, and the teacher caught me, and she decided she was going to humiliate me and put me on the, and she said, oh, what's going on over there? What's so important that's more important than our class here? What's under the table that's more important than, and I thought, I'm screwed, you know, I'm just going to be burned. So he said, why don't you bring up what's more important, show us. And so I brought my picture that I've been drawing. And she said, okay, tell us about it. I said, okay, well, here's, the cowboys are chasing Indians over a cliff. And the cowboys are shooting at the Indians are shooting arrows back at the cowboys. And above the cowboys are B-51 bombers bombing the cowboys. Because that's what I thought was really, I really enjoyed that. And she did something pretty amazing, because I thought I was about to be, I don't know what would have happened to me being self-conscious and feeling inadequate in a classroom. I don't know what would have happened had she not done something pretty amazing where she said, okay, tell you what, why don't we're going to put a newspaper paper on an easel, and every Wednesday we'll give you 15 minutes, and you come up and draw a story for the class, but then you have to pay attention. I said, okay, now had she gone the other way, considering the shape I was in at that time in my life, I don't know what would have happened.
I find it interesting that it's been said, it's been almost a cliche, that one of the problems with the institutionalization of film schools is that you have now more than one generation of young people who all they know is film. They haven't had so-called life experience. And life experience is what gives you the basis for telling stories and for inventing stories and imagining stories that you want to put on film. So you're good examples of that, because neither one of you grew up being so, obsessed with movies that you knew that was what you wanted to do. I mean, you would have rather been racing sports cars, right?
Right. But our friends, or my friends, who were obsessed with movies, are equally as successful as we are.
Well, okay, there goes that argument. But you really did try to be an artist. I mean, ultimately, when you were a young man. Well, sports also, I know, were a big part of your life.
Sports, also cars. I raced cars for a short period of time in Santa Barbara and Carpinteria and Palm Springs. And I was a big sports car lover, and I would watch all these races. And I was a big fan of Porsches as a racing car. So I aligned with George on that. I love cars, and I just wanted to race cars. But also I wanted to draw, and that was my... but I also was told that you can't eat art, I had a grandfather that said...
That's what my father said.
Yeah, you can't. Well, I was told, was told that why would you go on an endless pursuit, And also art was treated in those days as a trivial pursuit. It was not given any kind of credit for being substantial in any way. So you felt inadequate just because you loved it and you did what gave you pleasure, but you somehow at the same time knew that it wasn't registering as something important in the social world that you were in. And it created a kind of a tension that I think probably made me angry.
And what did you do with that anger?
I robbed a bank. No, when I did...
It would be a better story.
No, when I do that anger, I went to Europe to study art. I wanted to be a painter, and I wanted to be out of a classroom, and I wanted to have my education be in the world, experiencing Europe. Worked in an oil field to earn the money to last me for a year. Went to Europe, France, Italy, Spain. And to me, that's where my education really began, because I would go and I would draw. I would go to bars, youth hostels, and things like that, and I would sketch whatever was around me. And it gave me great pleasure. So I wasn't prepared for the turn my life would take later, because I thought that was going to be my path, but I also knew it was going to be a hard one, and that it was going to probably be a real struggle. But that was my passion.
Well, then, how did acting enter the picture?
Well, I went to New York. I went to Pratt Institute in New York to get a formal education in art, because I didn't have one. I wanted to go back to Europe because I loved being in Europe. I liked the culture and I liked the history of Europe. I thought America was a great place. It had great land, but it didn't have the cultural history that Europe did, so I was very taken with that. So I was on my way back there, and I was in New York, because I wanted to be in New York, not Los Angeles. I had grown up in Los Angeles, and had quickly fallen out of love with Los Angeles as it lost its, to me, it lost its identity that I had early in my life. You know, suddenly there were skyscrapers, there were freeways that didn't exist. There used to be a rail line down Santa Monica Boulevard, trolley car. And that was all gone, and it was like a gold rush. And I felt like the city that I loved as a little kid was pulled out from under me, so I wanted to go away. And so New York was, to me, the place to go to. So I went there.
And did you enroll in Pratt? Did you apply to Pratt Institute?
I did. I went there for a year, but while I was there, I was really footloose. And I didn't want anyone to ask me a question about what are you going to do. You know, it made me crazy because I knew that my answer was going to be unsatisfying. So I just didn't want to be asked. You know, if I said, I want to be an artist, I'd have to suffer the expression on their faces, you know. So I made up something. I said, well, I was going to Pratt Institute, and I said I want to be an art director. I didn't know what that meant. I just said it to get people off my back, because basically I didn't know what I wanted to do or be. And so while I was there, somebody said, well, if you want to go into art, you should maybe have set design. You should get that. Why don't you go to a dramatic school, and you can learn about drama, and maybe your connection there, you'll be able to. So I said, sure, anything. I was just free. So I ended up auditioning for the American Academy of Dramatic Arts as an actor, which was not in my plan as a kid. I didn't imagine myself being that. But I had to act. And so the teacher took me, and she took me on scholarship. She said, well, I think you have something, but you talk through your teeth. And she said, so you're going to have to learn how to open your mouth. But she took me on, and I went to the academy, and suddenly there was a shift that I wasn't expecting, because I love film, but I didn't have respect for film, because I thought it was what other people were saying, a trivial pursuit. Therefore, I was always guilty about loving movies. And when George was talking about these serials, as a kid, I would go to a movie and you would see 2 features, you would see a Pete Smith short, you'd see a cartoon, but you'd also sometimes see a serial. And the serial, at the last minute, and you were just like, I can't wait to come back here to see what's going to happen. So I experienced serials in movie theaters. And so later on, the idea of me being a person on the screen, it's hard for me to fathom. But something happened that surprised me, and that something clicked in an unsuspecting way. I wasn't expecting to feel the pleasure from acting that I did feel. And once that happened, I said, I guess this is a direction I should be going.
So it found you.
Pardon me?
It found you.
It found me wanting, yeah.
I'm interested in the you talk about people, that 3rd grade teacher changed your life.
Yeah.
The acting teacher who took you on scholarship certainly changed the course of your life.
No, I'll tell you what happened. It was really interesting. I was very self-conscious when I went to the academy, and I didn't want to be called on. I didn't want to be asked to step up and do anything. And so I was sitting, I'd always sit at the end of the line, and all the other students couldn't wait to get up there. Just couldn't wait to. And I just hid. I had an overcoat on, I had a hat on. I just didn't want to be called. And the teacher sensed that. And so he finally said, okay, we're going to do an exercise now, and you pick a partner. You pick a partner and come up with a scene to do and play. And of course, nobody went for me, you know. And so there was this older guy. I was maybe 20, I guess, at that time, and there's this older guy in his late 30s who was a teacher who wanted to be an actor, which was a big mistake. And he together because nobody else wanted me, nobody else wanted him. And he was really upset because he didn't like me. He just didn't like me. And so I thought he was really a nerd, and we were not going to hook up. So he said, well, what do you want to choose from? And I said, I don't care, whatever you want. He said, well, I have a scene from All My Sons, the second act where the son finds out the father's been selling faulty material to airplanes. and it's the scene where the son blows up, but the father has a big monologue. So obviously the guy wanted to be able to have this monologue. And I didn't have anything to do except get mad at him at the end of the scene. So I said, okay, that's fine with me. And so when we were rehearsing, I noticed that when it would come to my time to talk, he would mouth my words. And I thought, what in the hell? Mouthing my words. And I realized, oh, he's mouthing my words to prepare for his cue to speak. And that really pissed me off. So I thought, well, one thing I thought should be valuable is listening. I thought listening should be as important as talking. So I really got mad. And when it got to the end, and I was really mad at this guy, and I also was self-conscious to be in that school. There were a lot of things going wrong. So when we got to the moment where I had to pound him, I was supposed to pound him on his shoulders. And he pulls me aside before we go, and he says, listen, I have a teaching thing later on today. So don't mess up my clothing. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, just sort of hit me, light me on the shoulders. Could I tie it? And of course that upset me. And I said, okay, I will do that. And once we got going, and we did the scene, I was so nervous to be on display. I was so nervous and self-conscious that an energy took me over, and I suddenly realized he's not listening to what I'm saying. When it got time to, I grabbed him and I lifted him up, tore his shirt, threw him across the stage. He slid across the stage, and the button from his shirt went around a circle. Wow, that's really interesting. And then I thought, it's over for me. It's over. I shouldn't be in this. This is stupid. I lost it. I don't belong here. And so when the class was over, this guy was really upset, and I had to apologize to him, and I said, look, I'm really sorry. So that was the most disgraceful thing I've ever. And I thought he was right. And so I went to the teacher. I said, hey, listen, I'm not going to come back. I shouldn't be doing this. And he pulled me aside, and he said, hold on. He said, don't quit. I said, no, I made a fool out of myself, and I did. He said, don't quit. Just come back and be a part of things. Don't quit. Get over the self-consciousness and just come be a part of it, but don't quit. And I think that was the moment where a teacher, it could have gone the other way.
Wow.
Yeah.
These little moments all add up, and they're all crossroads, aren't they? They're all junctures in your life. And I want to talk about mentoring and whether you feel you've had mentors along the way. And you found one in Francis Coppola, of course. And why don't you tell us how that came about, and why do you think you two connected the way you did?
Well, Francis became famous. He's about 5 years older than I am, but he was the first film student to actually make it into the film industry. He started working for a Canadian company called Seven Arts as a writer, because he'd won the UCLA, won the Samuel Goldwyn writing scholarship. And so they hired him, and they said, well, we just bought this book, turn it into a screenplay, we want it done in 2 weeks. And so that's basically what he did for a living. And out of that, he talked them into letting him direct a movie, and he got to do some writing on some good movies like Is Paris Burning and Patton. And of course, they'd always then give it to another writer to once they had it where they could hang another writer, they'd say, okay, here, we got a script that's done, but it needs a rewrite. So you don't have to do the whole thing. But he got a job to direct Finian's Rainbow, and then, again, one of those quirky realities is that then Seven Arts bought Warner Brothers. This Canadian company bought Warner Brothers. And I had gotten a Warner Brothers scholarship for the summer where you go, it's a work scholarship, 6 months. You go to Warner Brothers, they assign you to a department, script, photography, editing, any department. And you spend 6 months there working with professionals. Well, as it turned out, they had just closed down. Jack Warner was leaving, and there was nothing going on. All the departments had been closed. There was nobody there.
In fact, didn't you say that the day you arrived, Jack Warner was
the day I arrived,
leaving?
They were moving stuff out, and I said, what's going on? And I said, well, they were moving Jack out of his office. He's, because it was literally the week that Seven Arts was taking over. And they said, well, we don't know what to do because there's no departments that are open and all this kind of stuff. The only thing we can do is stick you on the back lot because we're shooting one movie. It's the only thing that's happening here now. So they put me on this movie, and it was being directed by a kid who was 5 years older than I was, who had a beard and went to film school, and so we immediately hit it off. I had, just before that, had another scholarship working for Carl Foreman at Columbia. And there we got to actually shoot little behind-the-scenes movies, and it was more fun. And so I just said, look, and I had a tour, and I'd gone over to the animation department, which is where I started in film school, and it was empty. And I said, well, I'll just skip this, and I'm going to go over to the animation department, find some short ends, and make a movie. And then
Explain short ends for those who don't know.
short ends, this is in the old days, when you had to pay for film, and it was really expensive. And as I say, when you were doing independent films there, in those days, it was going to cost you at least $150,000, $200,000 just to buy the raw stock, have it processed, rent the cameras and do all that stuff. So to make a movie, it was just impossible to do unless you could come up with a few $100,000. So everybody would steal shorthands. When you finish shooting, they'd take what's left in the camera and they'd just toss it. And so you could get that, and it'd be like 100 feet or 50 feet or whatever, and you'd splice it all together and you'd use it to make a movie with. But Francis found out about it, and he said, I heard you were going to transfer to the animation department. What's that all about? And I said, well, I think you're boring. I said, I've done this. I don't want to do Hollywood movies. I have no interest in this at all. I'm really going to go off and be a documentary cameraman. I'm going to do more experimental type of films. I do not like character-driven drama. I don't like plots. I'm not into this stuff. Cinema is pure. It's not photographing a stage play. It's not photographing a book. It's pure. It's its own medium. So he liked that, but he was a stage director, and he was also a writer. And I think that all got along so well because I was basically a camera guy. I'd been working as a cameraman and an editor, and he was working, directing stage plays and writing screenplays. So there was a match there. I was really good at some of the stuff he didn't know that much about, and he was really good at the stuff I didn't know about because I had no interest in going there. Mm-hmm. But, we were both young, and we both... So, and everybody else on the crew was like over 60. And they sort of looked down on us like we were subhuman.
First time I met George and Francis, first time I met Francis first, it was 1960, and I was in the theater in New York, and I was hired to make a black and white film about war, 1960, it's called War Hunt. It was made by two brothers that had gone to, I think it was UCLA, they'd won a short, they'd won an award called the Time Out of War. And they got this contract with United Artists, and so there was a cast that I was...
The Sanders brothers, right?
What?
The Sanders brothers?
Sanders brothers, yeah. So I brought out to California to do this film. It was going to be about Korea, and they shot it in Topanga Canyon. It was $300,000. The guy driving the truck taking us up to the location was Francis. And he was just out of UCLA, right? UCLA Film School. He was just out of there, and he was driving this truck. And he drove it into a ditch. And then I had to help him get the car out of the ditch to get us up to the thing. That was my first experience with Francis. Second was I was doing film, and I stayed at his house. Now he's writing his Paris Burning, and he was going to go over to Paris, and he had this house in Topanga, in Mandeville Canyon, and I stayed in his house while he was in Paris writing this thing. So that was the second thing. George was the first film that I could, the second film that I could produce as an actor was The Candidate. And I had worked with a guy named Michael Ritchie, who I really thought a lot of, and he and I had both been very affected by documentaries, and wanted to do this series, a trilogy about the subject of winning. We wanted to use sports, politics, and business. So we did the Downhill Racer was the sports film, and then The Candidate was the political film. So Michael and I had worked together on both those. So we're up there in San Francisco, and I love working in Northern California. I just being from Southern California, I felt something was lost, and going up north was a different feeling. It was fresher, and the surrounding area was fabulous and so forth. I liked the people up there, and so we were filming a very low budget film. I think it was $1.4 million, and we were filming in different places. And suddenly I look around, there's this guy. He has a lot of hair and a beard, and it's dark. And so he looks dark, and it's George. And he just, I said, so I go to Richie and I said, hey, who's the guy? Who's that guy? He said, oh, that's Georgie. I said, well, who's Georgie? And he said, oh, he's just witnessing, he's just watching, he's doing this movie, TSX. And that's how I met George. That's how I became aware of George.
We're the only two people making movies in San Francisco at that point, was Michael and I.
Yeah.
I was doing THX and he was doing The Candidate.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That's how I saw George.
What did you learn? Well, I don't mean this as a negative question at all, but you both sort of had a little touch of the tail end of the old studio system. You were at Warner Brothers literally at the end, but nevertheless, you were on a major studio lot. Fred Astaire was starring in that movie, Finian's Rainbow. You started to work episodic television in the late 50s into the early 60s and did a lot of TV work at Universal, at MGM, on all those studio lots. Yeah. I wonder, what impression did that make on you? It's kind of funny because both of you have ended up going against all of that, and that's something we're going to discuss quite a bit about, the meaning of independence and all that, but they represented, the establishment, and were the establishment for so many years.
Well, again, this is the 60s when I was there, and we hated the establishment. All of us in film school hated the establishment in every possible way. Mm-hmm. I had no interest in working in a studio. I didn't like the studios. I didn't like the system. I didn't like the movies they made. I was very much against all that. So the only thing for me was I won these scholarships, and literally it was like, well, I should really see what this is all about before I condemn it completely. So I'll go and see what it's all about. But basically, I'm not interested. And I want to do documentaries. Again, coming up at that period of time, there were two significant things that happened. One was the fact that it was 60 years after the studio started. So all the people that started it when they were in their 20s were now retiring. And the studios were getting bought up by corporations. The corporations didn't have any idea how to run a studio, so they were hiring film students. If that, just being at the right place at the right time, all of us, this whole group that I was a part of, got ushered into the film business because the studios didn't know what they were doing, and you didn't have to be related to somebody to actually get into the industry. So that was a key factor. The other factor was they had invented small cameras, the Aeroflex, the Eclair cameras, and that was the birth of cinema verite documentaries. Before that, documentaries were dull. They're big things, and the river, and a lot of nice documentaries, but they were and there was no market for them. No place in the world. Nobody would show a documentary except maybe the BBC, but no place in America. No television station, nothing. They were made by the government, and most of the films I worked on at that time were government films, editing government films, because it just wasn't it didn't exist. And those two things were a major factor, because I wanted to get into this new era. I was a cameraman, and I liked being able to shoot with the little, new little areas and everything. So those things sort of drove me in a particular direction. But I definitely did not feel comfortable working in the industry. And so the studios to me were just, and I didn't like them. And as soon as we finished Finian's Rainbow, Francis and I went off. He wanted to do a film called The Rain People, where there was just like 7 or 8 of us. We went on the road and just made the movie as we went on the road. So we started in New York, drove across the country, got to Ogallala, Nebraska, rented a little warehouse, turned it into a studio, made the movie. I was born and raised near San Francisco, and I wanted to go back to San Francisco. We went and talked to, I had to go to a conference there, and I got a chance to meet and talk to John Cordy, who was a local filmmaker making feature films, independent. And, went back and said, Francis, this is what we got to do. We're not going to go back to Hollywood. We don't want to go back. Francis did not want to go back to Hollywood. He said, we want to get away from this. So I said, this is the perfect place. San Francisco, it's wonderful. We'll be happy there. It's kind of bohemian. So we just literally came from Ogallala, Nebraska, moved right into San Francisco, and tried to have an independent situation of the studios. I mean, we still had to go to the studios and beg for money, but we didn't want them running anything or coming up or bothering us or anything like that. And as it turned out, when we did the first films and scripts and everything, they just threw their hands up, put us in debt. We went bankrupt. That was the end of that. But of course, some of those scripts were Apocalypse Now, and The Conversation, and a lot of movies that turned out to be good movies.
Do you remember your first impression of the studios physically, going on those back lots and working on those sound stages?
Yeah, well, first of all, I was I spent a night in jail in Ogallala. I did. We won't go into that, but even I spent a night
So many
in jail
wonderful
in
touchstones between the two of you.
What?
Yeah. Wonderful touchstones between the two of you and your life experience.
And we were just slightly out of sync. I'd love to have to go, to get the permits or something at the police department, which is what I was doing, and run into Bob getting out of jail. That'd make a great story.
It was. I was going to school in Boulder, Colorado at that time, and it was kind of a wild time, and so we were on our way to visit a friend of ours' girlfriend in Ames, Iowa, and we were just barreling through Ogallala in the middle of the night, and we had liquor in the car, and so therefore we got arrested and thrown into jail. So we decided, well, we're going to be in jail, we're going to make something out of this. So while we were in jail, we started singing songs about jail. We sang the Lord's Prayer. I mean, we sang a lot of songs like jail would to want to say, get us out of this. That they didn't take kindly to that. So they added another night for us. But to answer your question, I don't want to get off the track here. Answer your question, I grew up in the studio system. I entered the system in 1959, I guess, and so therefore that's all there was. And so that's what you got. And so I felt I was privileged just to be able to work in film as an actor. Shortly into it, though, I began to want to make films myself. I wanted to author some stories about the country that I grew up in that was different from the country that was promoted. It was red, white, and blue America after the war, and everything was, we're a great country, which we are, and we're the best. And so I said, well, I agree with all that, but I see a different America. I see an America that's more in a gray zone, where things are more complex. And so I wanted to tell those stories, and it wasn't available to me, just the major studio system. So I was working in the system, and then once I had a success with one or two films, I was able to go to the studio, in this case it was Warner Brothers, and say, would you let me make a smaller film? And they said, if it's under $1.5 million, yes, you can go ahead. And then that enabled me to do The Candidate and The Downhill Racer and Jeremiah Johnson, some other films that were low budget, but I was able to make those films under the banner of the studio because they did that then. And then everything changed. What eventually led to Sundance was I just felt that I was so lucky to be able to tell stories about the America that I saw, and that was more complex than was being advertised. And I would hope that other people like myself would have that opportunity, but it wasn't available to them. I was just lucky. So when in 1980, things were changing drastically. Hollywood was becoming more centralized, and they were no longer going to make those smaller films along with their bigger films, therefore creating the category for independent film. And then they were going to be following the youth market, because that's where the money was. At the same time, cable was just about to explode. Cable and video was about to explode. And I could see that there was going to be this gap. What about those films that I loved making when the studio system included them? So maybe we can create something where we will have a development process to filmmakers that have a different point of view, have a more independent point of view, have a place to develop and work. And so that's what led to Sundance and then eventually festival.
So it was the idea of workshops first, and the festival was a kind of an afterthought.
Well, I'll make this quick. The workshop idea, we were a nonprofit, and I went to the National Endowment of the Arts to get $25,000 grant because I thought nobody would trust me. And somebody would say, well, we see you're in these big Hollywood movies. Why don't you pay for everything? You know, so I wouldn't get credibility, so I went there to get that credibility of a government grant. It was a nonprofit, and the only thing I could afford was the property that I had here in the mountains to bring people there. And I thought, well, maybe what will happen if you bring people here? Because by this time I was pretty anti-Hollywood. I was pretty much anti-studio system. I felt I didn't any longer belong to it. It was too conventional in its thinking, and I wanted to be free of that. So the idea was, okay, I've been able to make these little films along with the larger ones, but what about other people? And could we create something where they would have a chance to come and develop? Well, that happened, and about 5 or 6 years into our lab, it suddenly occurred to me that we were helping some of these new voices come and develop, but then they would get their movies made, but then there was no place to go because the mainstream wasn't allowing any space for them. So that led to the idea of a festival. And I thought, well, maybe what we can do is if we had a festival, we could have the filmmakers come and gather together as a community and show each other their work. And I didn't have the facilities over at Sundance at that time. That's 40 miles away from here, so I didn't have that facility. Didn't have a theater at that time. But Park City had one theater. So this is 1985, 86. So we said, well, can we use this theater? Can we use this place to show films? In those days, there was only about, Cooper would know, there's only about, 30 films maybe, and just a few documentaries. And we had the one theater. And so that's how it started. But what happened was that I didn't anticipate that there would be an audience other than the filmmakers themselves. Mm-hmm. So what happened when an audience started to come out of this thing, I thought, what's going on? Then I realized, oh, I see, we're getting audiences here from different places, Los Angeles and other places. They're coming here because they know they've got a wider menu than they've got in the marketplace. So they have a choice that they don't have anymore in the marketplace. So that's how it all started.
Well, it's one of the most remarkable success stories I can think of in the history of film. That's no exaggeration. I mean, talk about changing the course of filmmaking, film distribution, film exhibition, all of the things that Sundance continues to foster, both at the Institute and here. But it all began with you just feeling there had to be another way.
There's nothing more exciting to me. Look, I'm very happy for the festival. I never anticipated that it would become what it's become. It was just a hope. But still, and I'm very grateful for it. I'm very happy what it's done for the filmmakers. But to me, there's nothing more exciting than the lab process. Mm-hmm. When we come there with these new filmmakers and colleagues of mine come and they give of their time, and you had that exciting moment when you see a project grow, and it's fresh and it's new, and that's really pretty great.
Well, George, you built something too. You built. I'm not talking about what you built in terms of a worldwide fan base that is innumerable, uncountable. I don't know what the word would be, but I'm talking about what followed that. Establishing your filmmaking center, establishing ILM, establishing all of the satellite operations. I saw a documentary last night, Best of Enemies, here at the festival, which was really good. And at the end, all the sound work was done at ILM.
Skywalker Sound.
Sorry, Skywalker Sound. So, how did all that come about? What led to that? I mean,
well, it started with American Zoetrope. We moved to San Francisco. There was relatively little film industry up there. There were no labs, no mixing studios, nothing. And so we had to sort of put all that stuff in. And we did it at Zoetrope, very cheap, some chem mixers, and we got the whole thing for like $50,000. Francis did. I didn't have anything. I was a dirt poor student, but he had some money, and so we put the whole thing together there. But the issue is, and of course, when we did that, everybody said, well, you can't make movies in San Francisco. You just can't do it. You have to go to Hollywood to make movies. And both Francis and I were adamant, is that because this is what we learned in Ogallala. And you can make movies anywhere in the world. You don't have to go to Hollywood to do it. And it depends on how complex the crew is you need. But you can go anywhere in the world and make the movie. But you can actually start it, run your studio, write your scripts, do your editing, do all that stuff in, wherever you live. Because most people don't make their movies in Hollywood. They go out on location or go someplace to do them. And then they come back there. So when we went bankrupt, and Francis went off and did that Italian movie, I went off and did American Graffiti, which they wanted to change the title because I said it sounded too Italian. Sounded like an Italian movie about feet. They didn't know what graffiti meant in those days. But
wait. We can't let that pass. No. They really didn't understand what the word graffiti meant.
They didn't. The studio executives generally are not the most sophisticated people in the world. And you will find that if you go to Hollywood. I hope you don't, because you don't want to be oppressed by people who are not as smart as you are. And I'm dumb.
But you know what graffiti meant.
Yeah. And it perfectly summed up what the movie was. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, when I went on my own, I had to sort of replicate Zoetrope, which I did. First we started out on my house, and we built a little tiny screening room, and then we put a little T-Act mixing machine in, and so we slowly built up because we had to have a place to mix the movies, we had to have a place to cut the movies, and we had to have, so everything I've done literally to be, in the backwoods by myself to create the capability of making movies. And it was very hard then, as I said, the equipment was very expensive, the process was very expensive, but, and that's why I developed a lot of the technology over the years, was to make that more simply and much cheaper, much more simple process. So that was really how the company got created. Then, and obviously, I was not happy with Hollywood. I didn't want anything to do with them. And I didn't. Never made a movie in Hollywood, actually. I've made them everywhere else but Hollywood. And as a result, I had to have all my own stuff. As a result of that, I said, why should we use this equipment and this stuff when we can make it better? Because we want to, because I've worked. I was an editor and stuff, and I said, I hate this. I started at 16, went in 35, ripped up millions of sprocket holes, tore film, lost frames. I said, this is stupid. And I said, there's got to be a better way. And in the process of Star Wars, there were no visual effects houses. So I had to invent one. And so I did that, and then as a process of that, learning about digital technology and learning about, that sort of thing, I said, we could make this better. We could take the computers and we can make editing better. We can make cinematography better. We can make visual effects better. It really started with visual effects and editing. And so it was just simply a matter of saying, there's so much stuff you can't do in visual effects that you want to do, because it limits everything. In that time, the industry was about street films. It was about contemporary films. You couldn't make a giant epic because nobody could afford to do it. And so they said, well, you can't do another Bible movie, for God's sakes. Nobody's going to go see it. And they cost huge amounts of money. You got 10,000 extras. You got all this stuff, costumes and everything. You can't do it. There's not the market for it. There's no westerns. There's not a market for it. War movies. There's not a market for it. The studios would do one a year, and there were like little pockets of epics made during that period. But most of them were street films. Most of them were films that were just, psychological dramas, police dramas, all these kinds of things. I said, it's too bad, because epics and, to be able to go anywhere in the world you wanted to go is great. That's the fun. But if you're restricted to say, well, we can only do this, it takes all the fun out of it. And so under that situation, after I did Star Wars, I took the leap to, because the studio, you know, I avoided the studio because I was in San Francisco and they didn't bother to come up there. They didn't really bother to read the script. So THX, they freaked out when they saw it, obviously. Took all their money back from the studio, tried to recut it, tried to shorten it. I said, you can't understand it anyway. Why are you trying to shorten it? It's not going to make it make any more sense. And, but they said, we can do it. I said, 5 minutes is not going to make it. Why do you want to do that? You know, I put my heart and soul in this thing, and to me, it means something. You know, you just come in here and whack a few fingers off and think there's nothing to it. And so I was really angry about that. Then they did the same thing in American Graffiti because they thought it was a terrible movie. They put it on the shelf. They cut it. They cut 5 minutes out, the magic number. I said, why would you do that? I said, it doesn't make any difference. They said, well, we did it because we can do it. And I got really upset. They put it on the shelf. And so I was determined from under that thing of having them make cuts. And so what happened was, once Star Wars was a hit, I had, out of defense, acquired the sequel rights because they figured it wasn't going to go anywhere. But nobody thought it was going to make any money. So it was like half of nothing is nothing. So they let me have the sequel rights because by that time with American Graffiti came out, it was a huge, huge success. And you know, I had a deal with them to do like $125,000 to write and direct Star Wars. After American Graffiti, because I was writing American Graffiti during that, but I just had a deal memo, I hadn't actually finished it. I, you know, was the hottest director in Hollywood. And they said, oh my God, he's going to come and ask for $1 million. No director's ever gotten $1 million. Oh, what are we going to do? And Fox was sort of on the ropes. And so I went to them and I said, look, I'll take my salary. I'm not going to ask for $1 million. I signed the deal memo, and that's what I believe in. But everything is not mentioned in the deal memo. I'm going to relook at. And that was one, sequels, because I'd already written the 3 movies, and I knew I wanted to make them, regardless of whether the first one made any money or not. So I was operating on the fact the movie would be a turkey. They wouldn't want to make the next one. They would then say, well, we own the rights, you can't do it. And so out of that, I got the sequel rights. The licensing, which was the other part of this, didn't exist. Just there wasn't such a thing. So, especially in the movie business, a little bit in television, but not in the movie business, because it takes a year or two to make toys. You can't just do it, and the movie comes out, and it's out for 6 weeks, and that's the end of it. And a toy has to be out there for 6 months or a year. So nobody wanted to do that stuff, but what I wanted to do, because I assumed, with my experience before, both well, especially American Graffiti, but they didn't advertise it or anything. They just threw it out there. And I said, I want to be able to build an audience for this thing. So the one thing there was in licensing was posters and T-shirts. And you can make those deals really easy. So I said, if I get the licensing, I can make a whole bunch of T-shirts and posters, and I can send people out to Disneyland and everywhere, and I can advertise the movie. And so, and that obviously, everybody thought I was really brilliant, but I was really just protecting myself. And what happened after that was, the Star Wars came out, then suddenly we went to a toy company, we helped them build these little action figures, not G.I. Joes, you know, and stuff, but little ones. And they became very successful, and we ended up making a lot of money. A little bit on the movie, but mostly on you know, movies don't make money. I got news for you. So what happened was I did the most stupid thing anybody can do in the movie business. Anybody in the movie business knows not to do this, because you just already know that there's suckers out there, and anybody that invests in a movie is a sucker. And we've been through millions of suckers. You know, we went through Panamanian drug cartels. We went through Spanish and European conglomerate cartels. We all worked with these people.
Had the truck, the Egyptian guy that had the truck?
Oh, yeah, Fuad Saeed.
Saeed, yeah.
But there were all these guys out there, and they were getting all this funny money, and you knew, and then eventually they went to dentists. So these poor dentists were pouring money into movies, and it's basically was get to have a dinner with a starlet. And they took these people, and then, of course, they'd never see any money. And as a result of that, you just don't invest. I mean, I know you're all independent. I'm independent, but I've managed to be the stupid one. So I don't have to go and prey on somebody who's stupid and promise them something that they're never going to get. I just promise myself that, hey, I'm a genius. I can make this work. Which is even worse. So I just said, I will now take over and start financing my own pictures, because then they cannot touch me. They cannot come in and recut it afterwards. They can't make notes on the script. They can't do anything. And I've been lucky, because I've been very lucky in my career. I never made notes, because again, I was way off there. When I did Star Wars, I was in England, and it all came down to the very end. And I will say Fox was very, very good to me. The board hated the movie. Alan Ladd Jr., who was the head of Fox, gave me all the help and cooperation I needed. He gave me some extra money to do retakes, and and he never wanted to cut anything. So it was like, hey, this is the way it's supposed to work. But I realized that is such a fantasy. But I actually got to live it. But you're never going to find a studio executive like that. After that, the studio executives all decided that they were Irving Thalberg, and they were really in control of everything, and they're the ones that make the movies, not the director. The director's just some hired person, right, like the plumber who comes in and does that work. I don't know what they do, but they do the work that makes it happen. And writers have always felt that way, and they have been treated badly. So you kind of just say, I don't want to be a part of this. And so I went off and I invested everything I had and more into The Empire Strikes Back, and took out a big bank loan. There was a thing where we went over budget. The bank wouldn't extend our loan. We had to go get another bank loan. So we did it, but then that film worked, and I made that money, and then I invested it in the next film. So I kept investing everything I had into the next movie and into the company. And at the same time, I had...
You were building your infrastructure.
Yeah, I had ILM. It was 45 people in a little garage when it started. And as we started doing more movies, I was pushing them. We were doing Empire Strikes Back, and then we got E.T., and I got my friends to start going there. And so we built it into a company, because I had to support it in between my movies, because I only made a movie every 3 years. So we built that up, and the same thing with Skywalker Sound, which was the original little company we used to mix films, and we built that. And I got to do what I really wanted to do, what Francis and I wanted to do with American Zoetrope, was to be able to build a bigger studio. I was just working out of a house in San Anselmo, which was not zoned to be a studio or anything, but that's where we made Star Wars. But after that, we built a bigger studio and had a great state-of-the-art mixing facility. ILM, we were bringing along to build a state-of-the-art, because I wanted it to be great. I wanted it to be, you don't make any money in those businesses. Anybody who says they make money in post-production is, lying. Anybody that says that they make money in visual effects is lying.
It's about action figures. It's about action figures.
All the money's in the action figures.
Yeah. Okay.
If you own the movie, yeah, which I came to do, you make a lot of money. But you have to own it. But that means you have to put the money in. So you have to take the risk. The story of that was when I was talking to Ladd Jr., on the first Star Wars. We were sitting in his office, and I said, and the deal was, I got my $125,000, and I said, now we're splitting the profits, net profits. Nobody ever made money on net profits.
No.
Ever. You just can't, because they just stack the deck against you. And I said, but I had 50% of the net profits, because my company was going off, we were making the movie. And I said, I know what I'm doing for my 50%. I put my heart and soul in this, my whole career is at stake. I've got to actually go out and make the movie. I got all this stuff that I have to do for my 50%. What are you doing for your 50%? They said, well, I provide the money. I said, you don't provide the money. I said, you go to a bank with a letter of credit, and they supply the money. So you're not doing anything, and you get 50% of the movie. So then I came back for Empire Strikes Back, and I handed them this deal and had redone the contract. Instead of them giving their boilerplate contract, I gave them the boilerplate contract. And of course, my lawyer, and I said, you're going to do a contract, a distribution contract from scratch. He said, you know how hard that is? You know, that's really a lot of work. It's 180 pages or something like that. I said, look, how many chances are you ever going to get to write a distribution agreement for a studio? Nobody's ever done it. Nobody will ever get to do it again. So think of it that way. So he did. And, but I went into Laddie and I said, well, here's the deal. And, you know, I'm going to finance the film this time. I said, well, okay. And he looked at it and he said, well, wait a minute. You're getting 100% of the profits. I said, yeah. I'm financing it. Remember that 50% that you had that you were using? Well, I'm doing that now. So you don't get that 50%, and I get my own 50%. So now I got 100%. I'll give you a little distribution agreement on the side here. And, you know, being difficult as I am, and especially stubborn, you know, that's how it started. But, you know, it could have gone awry.
But look what he's done. What I admire about what he's done is that he's been able to control his whole universe. In other words, by coming up with a plan, I mean, this was the other side of his the other part of his creative side. Not only was he going to make a film, but he was going to come up with a way to handle the whole thing by himself, so he was not going to be dependent on anybody. And that goes back into the word independence.
Independence.
Yeah, and so I think that's what George beautifully represents, is true independence. He created the whole package for himself, took his risks, so forth. I'll only share one thing about independence with you that I love. And that is when I was, I'll make this quick, when I was doing the first film that I could make independently was Downhill Racer. And I wanted to make a film about winning and have the character be not a pleasant guy. And he would be excused because he could win. And that was the story I wanted to tell. Well, it took a while to get the thing going, and okay, if you have it for under $1.5 million. But here's the good thing about independent film, which I would share with the filmmakers here. One of the things I love about independent film is that if you're going to work independently, that means you're going to be working outside the studio system, which is very conventional in its thinking. But you're going to have to be creative. You're going to have to be very, very resourceful to make certain things work. And that's one of the things I appreciate. And I'll just give you one example that was very thrilling for me, and that was when we were doing the film, I felt that running the downhill was something incredible because you'd be going 70, 80 miles an hour. It was poetry and danger combined. But I wanted to capture the feeling of what it's like to run a downhill course, not just watch it from a distance, but what's it like to be there? So I tried everything. I tried rigs for the knees. I tried helmet. Nothing worked. Nothing really got it. And I thought, God, I want to find a way to do it. And then I'm there at the Olympics, and I'm in Kitzbühel, and I'm watching the races. Because we're going to be filming at Kitzbühel, and I wanted to look at the course because I'm going to have to be skiing part of it. And so I see this guy coming down, skiing alongside some skiers coming down, and he's got a camera, he's got an Airflex, and he's just going along. I said, wow, that's right, you hold it. You don't station it, you hold it. So we had this crazy kid that was on the Olympic B team. He was just a wild kid from Idaho. And he was like going to be doing stunt work. So I said, Joe J. Jalbert, I said, hey, Joe, I said, how would you feel about running the downhill, holding a camera, holding an Airflex? And he said, sure. And so he didn't really know what that meant. So anyway, we get up the top, stuck a microphone in his boot, gave him the Airy, and may the good Lord bless your skies. You know, we sent the guy off, and I was scared to death because I thought, I've organized this guy's death. So I'm about halfway down the course, and I'm waiting for signs. Oh, we've lost the guy. He's off. And I'm waiting. Okay, he just passed the style line. He's still going. Oh. He's still going. Anyway, he finally comes across the finish line and collapses. Now, that meant he made the course, he didn't fall, but what did he get? What did he get? We didn't know what he got. We had to wait 5 days while the film was sent to Munich to be developed, and then it was sent back, and I'll never forget that moment when I saw that scene of him running the downhill like you were the character. Now that was a result of independent film because you just had to find a way to be creative. And I think that's one of the virtues of film. It forces you to be resourceful and to be extra creative, and I think that's a good thing.
We have some cards, yes? Somebody going to give me some cards with some questions? Okay. Because we're going to run out of time, and I know that...
I think we are at it.
Yeah.
We all are. If nature takes its course, you'll actually run out before I do.
And some of this, it turns out, has been covered as I'm looking at some of these. All right, this is an interesting one. We'll start with you, Bob. Could you talk about a mistake you made and what you learned from it?
Mistake?
Yeah.
Being here today.
You also-
too many to talk about. There have been a lot of mistakes.
Perhaps it was not licensing a Jeremiah Johnson action figure.
Well, Jeremiah Johnson, well, that's a story I won't. That was put on the shelf for 3.5 years. It was not released because the studio, Warner Brothers, did not feel it was commercial, and so they didn't release it for 3.5 years. And I've had that. I had it with Downhill Racer. When I made that film, I was passionate about it. I was told by a guy in Albany as I was going around from place to place with the film in my hand, feeling like the studio was not supporting it. The guy told me in Albany, he said, "Something, kid," he said, "you're wasting your time. I hate to see you do this because the film's gone." I said, "What do you mean it's gone?" He said, "They've already written it off." So when you go through those experiences, you talk about mistakes. Well, there are plenty of mistakes, but there are also plenty of consequences that were negative that you had to live through, and you had to really love cinema. You had to love the idea of independence. You're going to get hammered pretty hard.
George, what advice would you give parents of young children to see beyond the ordinary?
Well, that's a very hard thing to teach, you know, and it really has to do with imagination. And some kids have a lot of it, some don't. But the idea that there are answers outside the box, and sometimes you should go take that risk, because it's not much of a risk, really. Although you may get embarrassed or something, but otherwise there's no big deal for suggesting something stupid or doing it. But part of it is just to encourage kids to do things or to see things differently. I mean, that's the reason I did Star Wars, was to get kids to realize you don't have to follow the rules. You can tell a fun story, but you don't need to be hampered. If it's Star Wars really isn't a science fiction film; it's a fantasy film. And a space opera. And I purposely said, well, I don't care about any of this stuff. I'm just going to make a great movie. I'm not going to worry about the rules. I'm not going to worry about science. I'm not going to worry about anything. I'm simply going to do what is entertaining, and especially for young kids. And when you do that, I'd say a good 10% of the things that are in Star Wars have come to pass, even though they were completely ridiculous and impossible when I made the movie. So no matter what you're doing, if you just say, look, let's just have a good time, and think outside the box, what if big dogs could fly spaceships? And if you fantasize that, you spark their fantasy life, and they say, well, yeah, I can think of all kinds of fun things to think about. And that's what you got to do, because you keep doing it, and you don't take people's words. I grew up in the era, don't trust anybody over 30. And, I still feel that. I still feel that don't trust me. But at the same time, you realize that the rules and the dogma and the ideology that people have just brings them down to a very small place. And you don't want to be in that place. Most of my movies are about the fact that you're in that little place. It's a little prison in your brain. The door is open, but you can't leave. But all you have to do is walk out and say, hey, I'm going to do this. I know it's kind of stupid, and I know I'm taking a risk, and I know, God knows what's going to happen. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that's the only way you get forward. If you're just going to follow the rule, believe what everybody tells you, follow the rules completely. I mean, I never did that. I've always been a contrarian.
Are you going to teach, you're the father of a 17-month-old child. Are you going to teach her that? Are you going to try to bring her up to believe those things?
I'm going to try. My wife is in charge of her. She's.
God.
I had my 3 kids, and she has a certain idea. When we decided to have a baby, she said, "I've got to be able to educate her." We have a different. I'm a junior college guy. I went to the University of Spoiled Children. I'm a filmmaker. I don't like any of those real things where you have to dress up. And she went to Princeton. She's a money manager. She works on Wall Street. She does all. She's the exact opposite of me. So I guess in the end, to have my daughter have a great education is more important. If she has any of my genes, she'll be crazy enough to ignore all that stuff. And we decided we're either going to have a very, very crazy child, or a very smart child, or a very smart, crazy child. So we're hoping for the smart, crazy child.
We'll check back with you in 17 or 18 years and see. Bob, what are your views on diversity in cinema, particularly women's voices and women in the industry?
Well, diversity is the name of the game as far as I'm concerned. That underlines the word independence to me. Independence and diversity go hand in hand in my mind. And what was the other part? What was the?
Just your feelings about women's voices, women's
I think
role
that,
in the industry.
I think the future, this is just my opinion, the future is going to be in the hands, for us to move out of where we are now, to move to something more sustainable and more exciting. I think it's going to be in the hands of women and young people. I think the young people that are coming on today, I mean, we have kind of messed up what we're handing them in terms of a planet. And they have less to work with than they would have had years ago, but I have hope in them because I think young people today are really, really smart. And what I saw was that a few years ago, young people were disenchanted with the system to the point where they wouldn't go into politics, they didn't want anything to do with it. And I think that's changed now. Young people want to be given the reins. They say, look, just don't talk about history, just give us the reins, just let us have it. And of course, I think women, because of their nurturing sensibilities, are the way to go. So you put those two things together, and that's what I have faith in.
A lot of people agree with you. A lot of people would like to see it happen.
Well,
well, this is like shooting fish in a barrel, but I'm going to ask you this anyway. What is the new frontier for cinema? How do you think new technology will change the industry? 3D, virtual reality, all of these things that are...
Well, a lot of the hype on new technologies, I think, is overhyped. You still have a reality to deal with, and that's entertainment. You have to entertain people. And of course, I'm one of those guys probably that 10 years ago, even though I was involved in all of it, I would never have guessed that people would sit in front of a all day long watching cats do stupid things. But we're there, and so I wouldn't have predicted that. Even though I started out as a non-story guy, I'm now much more of a story guy. And I'm much more about, a more full-fledged experience rather than a quick little thing. And I think there's room for that. That's a whole different thing. But when you get into feature films, television shows, dramatic films, or documentaries, there's more to it than just what I call a circus. A circus is where we used to call it in film school, puppies on a freeway, which is the best way to make a good circus film, is simply to get a basket full of puppies, go out to the freeway, turn the camera on, throw the puppies out in the freeway, and see how long they last, and when one gets hit, then you take another one and throw it out there. And you do that for
You're of course speaking metaphorically.
you do that for 90 minutes and you got a movie, and it's probably better than most of the movies out there. And that's what a lot of people do. You know, a lot of the movies that you see today basically are circus movies. I mean, it's also like feeding lions. It's like going to a real circus where somebody's walking a tightrope. It doesn't have anything to do with telling a story. It just has to do with the fact that, gee, let's see how much blood comes out when he splats. And, you know, I mean, again, the movie industry has turned into a bit of a circus. It always has been there. But, you know, it's now gotten to be more and more circus without any substance behind it. And, you know, I get blamed for a lot of that, but at the end, you know, if you go into Star Wars and take the time to actually see what's going on, there's a lot more substance there than circus.
So, you know, what do we have at the New Frontier here? It's showing what role technology is playing with film. That's for that. And some of the stuff is fascinating. Some of the stuff requires a lot of material to make it work. You got to have something here, you got to have something there. That I don't agree with. But it's nice to see it. It's like to see what's out there. But for me, maybe for myself and work that I'm interested in, or the work that I want to do, story comes first. I think there's a lot of exciting films out there, but I can see that it's missing a story. It's got special effects, it's got this, it's got that. But then I come away saying, it feels like cotton candy at the end of it. Where's the story? So for me, story is crucial. And if I'm going to do a project, I will break it down into 3 parts. What's the story, who are the characters, and where's the emotion? Those 3 steps, otherwise I won't go there, because I think that is what is satisfying. But I do believe the story is essential.
Right, I agree with that. And again, for me, a lot of people confuse and say, well, Star Wars is just a lot of special effects. People came out after that and did a lot of special effects movies, and they were terrible. Nobody wanted to see them. The thing is, I never invented any technology. What I did is I ended up with a problem, a story idea. How do I get this puppet, it's that big, it's got a guy's hand in it, you can't see the bottom of his thing. But I really wanted him to move around and have sword fights and how do I do that? You can't. It's not possible. Just cut that out of the script, forget it. So I went about trying to invent the technology to be able to do that. Not, gee, I want to invent some new technology and then I'll figure out what to do with it. Everything I've ever done has been to make the process easier and to open up the ability to do more in your imagination and actually accomplish things. And everyone has a specific job. Every visual effect at ILM was invented for a particular shot or a particular movie that had to have something that needed to be accomplished, and then you did all this work to invent the technology to do it. Once we went digital, it was way easier, just because digital is an easier medium to move things around and expand and solve problems in. But what happens when you do that, when you kind of invent a new technology, you get a lot of other people who may or may not be as creative, and they just sort of exploit the technology. They say, well, I don't have to do anything. It's so cool. I'm just going to do this and this and this, and it doesn't work. And, you know, whether it's color or sound or, you know, 3D or digital technology, it's just, you know, a lot of people like to play in it, but that's not the point. The point is that it allows you to do things that you can't do otherwise.
Yeah.
And that's the purpose of it all. And all art is technology. It's the one thing that separates us from other animals. You know, you can teach an ape to draw a picture, not a very good one, but a contemporary, a Damien Hirst. But you cannot, but a chimpanzee or an ape on its own cannot come up with an emotion and then use technology, a brush, a stick, anything, to create a picture that transfers that emotion to other people. Only humans can do that. And whether it was the guy who invented to pick up a piece of charcoal and draw on a cave wall, and then the other guy said, hey, you know, I can make this even better. I got a piece of ochre, rock, and I can make it have color. Or if you go all through the history of art, artists always bump up against technology. Every time, all the time. That's the biggest thing you contend with. And most artists, especially true during the Renaissance, the artists were scientists. They had to figure out how to accomplish things, whether it's building the Duomo in Florence or whether it's figuring out how to invent a little tube that you could put oil paints in so it didn't dry out. So you could get out of doing the fresco and get into the field and paint light as it really is. These are all major technical advances, and that's what allows you to have a better performance. Because in the end, I like to tell people, don't get hung up on art. You're an entertainer, and people will come along later and decide whether you're an artist or not. But in the end, you're just a guy or a girl standing in the corner with your hat in front of you, twiddling on whatever you're twiddling on, painting pictures, singing, dancing, doing whatever, and you hope to hell at the end of the day you got enough money put in there to eat. That's all it comes down to. You can argue anything else you want. If you're really good at it and you're talented and everything, you will go a long way.
My grandfather said when he heard that I was going to be an actor, or before that I was going to be an artist, he said to my dad, "What's he doing?" My dad said, "Well, he's going to be an artist." He says, "Tell him, doesn't he know you can't eat art?"
All right. Well, that's actually what I did when I was in film school, or even before, during the summers. I would paint pictures and sell them on the beach, because I lived on the beach. And, my daughter said, my father said, you never make money as an artist. Artists don't make money. But, little do they know now that if you really want to make money, you shouldn't be here. You should be painting. Because painting is, you can do one of those paintings, mostly a white canvas or whatever, and make $50 million. We don't make $50 million a movie. I mean, you might, but I don't.
No.
Bob?
Yeah.
What is the biggest lesson you learned at any point of your career? Is there a lesson you learned at some moment that stays with you, that resonates with you?
A lesson learned?
Yeah.
I think if you want to boil it down to some very simple, it would be pay attention. Just pay attention to what's around you. Listen, pay attention, that's it.
That can apply at any level, can't it?
Yes.
From the smallest detail to the largest.
Yes. Sometimes you can tell a story. I've always liked the idea of a single gesture telling a whole story about a person. If I'm doing a film, I usually like to find a moment where there's something that's done. And just that small gesture tells you everything you would want to know about that character.
Well, you pretty much had that opportunity in All Is Lost, didn't you? Without any dialogue, because showing is so much more effective than telling in films. That's the axiom anyway, but I think it's true.
Yeah, I like that film because I like doing it. It was hard, but I like doing it because it was stripped away of things that you might see in films. It didn't have any voiceovers, didn't have any special effects. You just removed all those things. All those things were removed, so there was just a direct line between the character I was playing and what he was going through. And the challenge as an actor was you had to really occupy that space with that person. You had to be there. You had to really be there. There's nothing that's going to give you any help.
Well, we've had not a virtual experience, but this is an actual experience. You're all sitting there, we're sitting here. It's been a pleasure to listen to both of you.
And thank you, by the way.
You're very welcome. My pleasure to be
you.
here. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Very good.